They sold my house. While I slept, now I own their future. My name is Martha Benson. I am 75 years old, and I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Because this is a story about betrayal so deep, so cruel, that it will make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty. I lived in Millbridge my entire life, a small industrial town where everyone knew everyone, where handshakes meant something, and where family was supposed to be sacred. For 53 years, I called the same house on Maple Street my home. My husband Robert and I bought it when we were newlyweds, painted every room together, planted the oak tree in the front yard with our own hands. We raised our 2 children there, David and Susan, and later welcomed our grandchildren for holidays and summer visits. When Robert died 4 years ago, that house became more than just my home. It became my sanctuary, my memory palace, the only place where I could still feel his presence in the creaking floorboards and smell his aftershave lingering in the closets. But think about how I felt when I woke up from what should have been a routine medical procedure to discover that everything I loved, everything I had worked for, everything that defined me, had been stolen while I slept. Imagine losing everything you treasure to the people you trusted most. Let me take you back to where it all began, 3 months ago, when my world started, unraveling thread by thread. I had been feeling tired lately, more tired than usual for a woman my age. My doctor, Dr. Peterson, recommended what he called a minor procedure to check for some irregularities in my heart rhythm. Nothing serious, he assured me. I would be under light anesthesia for maybe 2 hours, then home the same day. It's routine. Martha, he said with that practiced bedside manner doctors use when they want you to stop asking questions. You'll be back to your garden by the weekend. I should have known something was wrong when David suddenly became so interested in my medical care. My son, who hadn't visited in 6 months, who forgot my birthday last year, who couldn't be bothered to return my phone calls. Suddenly he was asking detailed questions about my surgery, insisting on driving me to the hospital, hovering around my bedside like a concerned son. Mom, you know we just want what's best for you, he said, squeezing my hand with what I thought was genuine affection. Susan and I have been talking, and we think maybe it's time you considered simpler living arrangements. I squeezed his hand back. Oh, honey, I'm not ready for that yet. The house keeps me young. He smiled. That same smile he'd used as a boy when he was hiding something. Of course, Mom. We're just thinking ahead. The morning of the surgery, I remember feeling unusually nervous. Not about the procedure. I'd survived worse. But about something I couldn't quite name. A mother's intuition, perhaps. A sense that the people around me were performing roles rather than expressing genuine care. Susan arrived at the hospital with a stack of papers. Just some insurance forms, Mom, she said, barely looking me in the eye. Sign here and here, standard stuff. I was already feeling drowsy from the pre-medication. My vision blurry, my thoughts soft around the edges. The paper swam before my eyes, but Susan guided my hand to the signature lines with practiced efficiency. There you go, Mom. All taken care of. Those words, all taken care of, would haunt me for weeks to come. The surgery went perfectly. Dr. Peterson found nothing wrong with my heart except the natural wear of 7.5 decades. I woke up in recovery feeling refreshed, almost euphoric from the anesthesia wearing off. The nurse, a kind woman named Carol, helped me get dressed and told me someone was coming to pick me up. Your son called, she said. He'll be here in an hour. But David didn't come. Instead, a young man I'd never seen before appeared at my bedside with a wheelchair and a clipboard. Mrs. Benson, I'm here to take you to your new residence. The words hit me like ice water. My what? Sunset Manor Care Facility, your family, has arranged for your transition today. I laughed, actually laughed, because the mistake was so absurd. "Young man, I think you have the wrong person. I'm going home to Maple Street." His smile was professionally sympathetic. "Ma'am, I have the paperwork right here. Signed by you this morning and witnessed by your daughter. You've been admitted to our facility for long-term care." The world tilted, sideways. Through the fog of confusion and residual anesthesia, I began to understand the magnitude of what had happened. Those papers Susan had insisted I sign, they weren't insurance forms. They were commitment papers. "Where is my son?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "Where is David?" "Your family felt it would be easier if they weren't here for the transition," the aide said gently. "Sometimes goodbyes are too difficult." Think about that moment. Think about waking up to realize that your own children, the babies you held, the toddlers you comforted through nightmares, the teenagers you sacrificed everything to support through college, have betrayed you in the most fundamental way possible. They had stolen my freedom while I was unconscious. Sunset Manor was exactly what you'd expect from a care facility that accepts hastily arranged admissions. Clean enough to pass inspections, but sterile and impersonal. My room was a 10 by 12 cell with industrial carpeting, fluorescent lighting, and a view of the parking lot. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came 3 days later when I finally reached David on the phone. "Mom, please try to understand," he said, his voice heavy with manufactured patience. "You can't live alone anymore. You're not safe in that big house." "David, I was never unsafe. I've been managing perfectly well." "Mom, you left the stove on." "Twice last month." "I did not. And Mrs. Henderson called to say you were wandering around the neighborhood at night in your nightgown." "That's not true, and you know it. The point is, we can't take care of you from a distance, and we have our own lives to consider. Susan's kids are starting college, and I have my business to run. This is the best solution for everyone." "What? About my house? My things?" There was a pause, a silence so loaded with guilt that I knew the answer before he spoke. "We've sold it, Mom." The phone slipped from my hands and clattered to the floor. Sold it. Past tense. While I was sleeping off. Anesthesia. While I was being processed into this sterile facility like a piece of unwanted furniture. My children had sold my home. "The market was too good to pass up," David continued, his voice tinny through the fallen phone. "We got full asking price. The money will pay for your care here for years." I picked up the phone with trembling hands. "You had no right." "Actually, Mom, we did. You signed a power of attorney form. It's all legal." Legal. As if legality had anything to do with what was right. That night, lying in my narrow institutional bed, listening to the moans and cries of other forgotten souls down the hallway, I made a decision that would change everything. My children thought they had checkmated me. They thought that by stealing my home, my independence, and my dignity, they had won some kind of game I didn't even know we were playing, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated me. You see, what David and Susan didn't know, what they couldn't have known because they never bothered to really listen to me, was that I hadn't spent 50 years as the wife of a small-town banker without learning a few things about money, law, and patience. Robert may have handled the day-to-day banking, but I was the one who managed our personal investments. I was the one who read the fine print on every contract, who researched every stock purchase, who built our retirement portfolio from nothing into something substantial. And I was the one who, 20 years ago, had quietly established a series of trusts and financial instruments that my children knew nothing about. The house on Maple Street, the house they sold, was only the beginning of what I owned. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the weeks that followed, when I was forced to live among the forgotten, while my children celebrated their supposed victory. Sunset Manor was filled with people like me, elderly men and women whose families had found it convenient to warehouse them away from sight and mind. There was Harold, a former mechanic whose son never visited. Margaret, a retired teacher whose daughter lived 3 states away and called once a month out of obligation. Frank, a Korean War veteran, whose grandchildren didn't even know he existed. At first, I was consumed by rage. I spent my days pacing the facility's corridors, demanding to speak with administrators, threatening legal action, insisting that I had been committed against my will. But the system had seen people like me before. Elderly individuals who claimed their families had betrayed them, who insisted they were competent to live independently, who raged against the machine that had processed them into institutional care. "Mrs. Benson," the social worker explained, with practiced patience, "your family followed all the proper procedures. You signed the admission papers yourself. The power of attorney is legally binding. Unless you can prove mental incompetence on their part, or fraud in the documentation, there's nothing we can do." Fraud. The word hung in the air like a lifeline. That night, I called my old friend Eleanor Hartley, who had worked as a paralegal for 30 years before retiring. "Eleanor, I need your help," I said quietly, speaking softly so the night staff wouldn't overhear. "I need to understand exactly what my children did to me, and whether there's any way to fight it." Eleanor listened as I explained the circumstances of my commitment, the papers I'd signed while medicated, the sale of my house. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Martha, what you're describing sounds like what we used to call granny snatching, adult children taking advantage of a temporary vulnerability to seize control of an elderly parent's assets. The problem is proving it happened." "What would I need to prove?" "You'd need to demonstrate that you were not competent to consent when you signed those papers, that you were under the influence of medication, that you didn't understand what you were signing, that your children misrepresented the nature of the documents. The nurse who gave me the pre-medication might remember, and there might be medical records showing the timing of when I signed the papers versus when I received the drugs. That's a start. But Martha, even if you could prove fraud, getting your house back would be nearly impossible if it's already been sold to a third party. The best you could hope for would be monetary damages. Monetary damages, as if money could replace the home where I'd spent my entire adult life. But Eleanor's words had planted a seed of an idea. If I couldn't get my house back, perhaps there were other ways to seek justice. That night, I began to make a list of everything I remembered about my family's finances. David's business, a small construction company that had been struggling for years. Susan's husband's job at the insurance agency, the college tuition they were facing for their children, the mortgages, credit card debts, and financial pressures I'd overheard them discussing at family gatherings when they thought I wasn't listening. My children had stolen from me because they needed money. They had justified their betrayal by convincing themselves that they were solving both their problems and mine. But what they didn't know was that I had more money than they could imagine, hidden in investments and accounts they'd never heard of. And unlike them, I knew how to be patient. Over the next few weeks, I began to make phone calls, quiet calls, made from the payphone in Sunset Manor's lobby when the staff was distracted. Calls to my old broker, to the trust administrators Robert and I had worked with, to the lawyers who had helped us structure our estate planning decades ago. "Mrs. Benson, we were wondering when we'd hear from you," my broker said when I finally reached him. "The quarterly statements have been returned as undeliverable." "I've had to relocate temporarily," I said carefully. "But I need to make some changes to my portfolio." "Of course. What did you have in mind?" "I want to liquidate some holdings and make some strategic investments. High-risk, high-reward opportunities that might not pay off for months or even years. That's unusual for someone in your position, but certainly doable." "What kind of investments are we talking about?" "I want to buy distressed debt," I said. "Specifically, I want to buy defaulted loans and mortgages. Can you find me some opportunities in the Millbridge area?" There was a pause. "Mrs. Benson, that's a very specialized and risky market." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure, and I want to do it anonymously, through shell companies if necessary." "Can you arrange that?" Yes, but may I ask why? I smiled for the first time in weeks. Let's call it a family investment. Think about the irony. While my children were celebrating their clever betrayal, counting the money they'd stolen from the sale of my house, I was using the resources they didn't know I had to quietly buy up their debts. You see, David's construction company had been operating on borrowed money for years. He'd taken out equipment loans, material financing, even a second mortgage on his own home to keep the business afloat. Susan's family wasn't much better off. Credit card debt, student loans, a home equity line of credit that was stretched to its limit. They had betrayed me for money they desperately needed, never realizing that I had more money than they could spend in a lifetime, and now I was going to use that money to buy their futures. It took 6 weeks to arrange everything. 6 weeks of quiet phone calls, discreet financial maneuvers, and careful legal planning. My broker worked with a network of debt collection agencies and distressed asset buyers to identify and purchase every significant debt my children owed. David's equipment loans, Susan's credit cards, both of their mortgages, student loans, business, lines of credit, medical bills, even the financing on David's truck and Susan's SUV. By the end of October, I owned my children's lives, but I wasn't ready to reveal that yet. I needed them to understand the full scope of what they had done to me before I showed them the consequences. The opportunity came on Thanksgiving. I had been at Sunset Manor for 2 months by then, and I had requested permission to have Thanksgiving dinner with my family. The social worker was initially reluctant. Family visits were encouraged, but overnight stays required extensive paperwork and medical clearances. Please, I begged, playing the role of the pathetic, lonely old woman they expected me to be. I just want one more holiday with my children. I promise I'll come back quietly. After much negotiation and form filling, they agreed to let David take me to Susan's house for Thanksgiving dinner, with the understanding that I would return to the facility that evening. When David picked me up, I was the picture of institutional compliance. I wore the simple dress they'd brought me, carried my few possessions in a small bag, and thanked him profusely for his kindness. "You look good, Mom," he said, though his eyes avoided mine. "Are you settling in okay at Sunset Manor?" "Oh, yes," I said sweetly. "It's quite an education." Susan's house was exactly as I remembered, suburban, comfortable, decorated with the kind of generic furniture and mass-produced art that suggested middle-class aspirations without much actual money to back them up. The grandchildren were there, Jessica, now 19 and home from college, and Michael, 17 and already taller than his father. They greeted me with the awkward affection of young people who weren't quite sure how to interact with their institutionalized grandmother. "Grandma Martha." Jessica hugged me tightly. "We've missed you so much. Dad said you're doing really well in your new place." "It's been an adjustment," I said carefully. "But I'm learning so much about family." During dinner, I listened as my children and their spouses discussed their plans, their worries, their financial pressures. David mentioned that his business was going through a rough patch, but that he was confident things would turn around after the holidays. Susan talked about Jessica's college expenses and how they were managing to cover tuition. "It's worth it," Susan said, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "Education is the most important investment we can make." Investment. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. After dinner, as we sat in the living room with coffee and pie, I decided it was time to begin my revelation. "I want to thank you both," I said, my voice warm and grandmotherly, "for taking such good care of me during this difficult time." David and Susan exchanged glances, the quick, guilty look of conspirators who thought they were getting away with something. "Of course, Mom," David said. "We're family." "Yes, we are family, and that's why I want to share some good news with you." I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope. "I've been doing some financial planning from Sunset Manor, and I've made some investments that I think will benefit all of us." Susan leaned forward eagerly. What kind of investments? Well, you know how your father and I always believed in supporting family businesses. I've decided to become a more active investor in your lives. I opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of documents, legal papers, purchase agreements, debt transfer notifications. David, I know your construction company has been struggling, so I bought all of your business loans. And Susan, I know you and Tom have been worried about money, so I purchased your mortgage and credit card debts. The room went very quiet. David took the papers with shaking hands, his eyes scanning the legal text. Mom, what does this mean? It means I own you, I said simply. Every debt you have, every payment you make, every financial obligation you've incurred to maintain your comfortable lives, it all comes to me now. Susan's face had gone white. That's not possible. Oh, but it is. You see, when you sold my house, you got approximately $320,000 after fees and commissions. That's a nice sum. Enough to pay for my care at Sunset Manor for maybe 8 or 9 years, assuming I live that long. I paused, letting them absorb the numbers. What you didn't know is that your father and I were much better savers than you. Realized. The house was just a small part of our assets. Over the past 50 years, we accumulated a portfolio worth just over $2.3 million. Jessica gasped. Michael stared at me with new respect. David and Susan looked like they were going to be sick. $2.3 million, David whispered. $2.3 million. Hidden in trusts, investments, and accounts that you never knew. Existed because you never bothered to ask about my finances. You just assumed I was a helpless old woman whose only asset was her house. I pulled out another set of documents. With that money, I was able to purchase your debts for pennies on the dollar. Your business loans, David, cost me about 15 cents for every dollar you owe. Your mortgage, Susan, was even cheaper. The bank was happy to sell it to avoid the paperwork of foreclosure proceedings. Foreclosure? Tom spoke for the first time, his voice barely audible. Oh yes. You see, when you buy distressed debt, you also buy the right to collect on it immediately, which means that as of tomorrow morning, I can demand full payment of every debt you owe, or I can begin foreclosure and repossession proceedings. The silence stretched like a taut wire. I could see the calculations happening behind their eyes, the dawning realization of what their betrayal had cost them. But Mom, Susan said desperately, we're family. You wouldn't I? My voice hardened. You sold my home while I was unconscious. You committed me to an institution against my will. You stole my freedom, my dignity, and my independence because it was convenient for you. You treated me like a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. David was staring at the papers in his hands. The business loans alone are over $400,000. If you call them in, you'll lose everything, I finished. Your business, your home, your vehicles, everything you worked for, everything you built, everything you thought you'd secured by betraying me. What do you want? Susan whispered. I smiled. Not the sweet, grandmotherly smile they expected, but something sharper, more predatory. I want justice. I want you to understand what it feels like to lose everything you love to someone you trusted. I want you to experience the helplessness, the betrayal, the crushing realization that the people you counted on saw you as nothing more than an obstacle to their own comfort. I stood up, smoothing my simple dress. But I'm not as cruel as you are. I'm not going to destroy you completely. Instead, I'm going to offer you the same choice you offered me: compliance or consequences. What kind of compliance? David asked. First, you're going to reverse the commitment proceedings. I'm going home tonight, to a home you're going to purchase for me with the money you stole from my house sale. A nice home, fully paid for, with enough left over for housekeeping and maintenance. And second? Susan's voice was barely a whisper. Second, you're going to rebuild our relationship on my terms. You're going to visit me regularly. Not when it's convenient, but when I ask. You're going to include me in family decisions. You're going to treat me with the respect and dignity that I should have received all along. And if we do that? If you do that, I'll restructure your debts into manageable payment plans. You'll still owe me every penny, but you'll pay it back over time with reasonable interest. Your homes, your businesses, your futures will be secure. And if we don't? I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. If you don't, then tomorrow morning I'll begin foreclosure proceedings on everything you own. You'll lose your homes, your businesses, your vehicles. You'll discover what it means to be truly helpless, truly at the mercy of others. I paused at the door and looked back at them. My children, my grandchildren, my family, all staring at me with a mixture of fear, respect, and something that might have been admiration. The choice is yours, I said. But you have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to decide. David drove me back to Sunset Manor in complete silence. As we pulled into the parking lot, he finally spoke. Mom, I'm sorry. We thought we were doing the right thing. No, David. You thought you were doing the easy thing. There's a difference. What happens now? Now you decide whether you want a mother or an enemy. The next morning, David and Susan were waiting for me in the Sunset Manor lobby at 8:30 a.m., along with a lawyer and a stack of legal documents. We want our mother back, Susan said, tears streaming down her face. We want to make this right. It took 3 weeks to unravel the legal mess they'd created. The power of attorney was revoked. The commitment proceedings were reversed. A new house was purchased, smaller than my old home, but comfortable and located in a neighborhood where I could walk to shops and restaurants. More importantly, it took 3 months to begin rebuilding our relationships. David started coming by every Sunday for dinner, and we actually talked about his business, his fears, his hopes for the future. Susan called twice a week and brought the grandchildren to visit regularly. They paid their debts faithfully, month after month, and gradually I could see that they were learning the lesson I'd tried to teach them. Family isn't about convenience. It's about commitment. It's about seeing each other as whole human beings deserving of respect and dignity, regardless of age or circumstances. But the most important lesson, the one that I hope you'll remember long after you've forgotten the details of my story, is this: never underestimate the power of patience, preparation, and quiet determination. My children thought they had checkmated me when they stole my house and my freedom. They thought that by putting me away in an institution, they had solved their problems and eliminated an inconvenient burden. What they discovered is that wisdom and cunning aren't diminished by age. They're refined by it. They sold my house while I slept, thinking they were taking my future. Instead, they gave me the motivation to take theirs. And in the end, we all learned that sometimes the only way to rebuild a family is to first tear down the lies and selfishness that have corrupted it. Today, 3 years later, I'm sitting in my comfortable living room, looking out at the garden I've planted in my small backyard. David just left after helping me install new shelving in my study. Susan is bringing the grandchildren for dinner tomorrow night. We're not the same family we were before. We're better, stronger, more honest. Because sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is to show them the consequences of their choices. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the patience to wait for justice, and the wisdom to make it meaningful when it finally comes. They thought they owned my future when they sold my house while I slept. But in the end, I owned theirs. And that, my friends, is a lesson worth learning.